Welcome to the Twist News. This is Erika Grey. These are exciting times in which we live, in which so much is rapidly changing. And what is about to change is the regime in Iran. The cracks are in the foundation and all throughout the building of the current regime, and it's just a matter of time. I am thrilled to have on today's program Shahin Gobadi, the Paris-based spokesperson from the National Council of the Resistance of Iran. Shahin, welcome to the show again.
Oh, thanks for having me again. Definitely, there were a lot of things happening since I was in your show. And if you remember, and if I do recall correctly, I kept saying that, look, if appeasement continues, war becomes inevitable. And this is exactly what happened. I said Iran's nuclear program is getting totally out of control, and challenging it would become inevitable, and that's what happened. But still, I think the ultimate solution hasn't changed. I mean, the ultimate solution is a regime change by the Iranian people and the resistance from bottom up, as they say. And I think what happened and what transpired very much lend credence to what we have been saying for years. Actually, Madam Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, 21 years ago, while addressing European Parliament, said one should not get into appeasing the mullahs, and at the same time, foreign war is not necessary. There is a third option, that is a change by the Iranian people and the resistance regime change. And yes. I think now this is very much more
close, and that's what I meant by an exciting time. Is who would have thought on our last interview that all would have transpired? And so one of my questions I want to throw at you right away is, how close is it for the regime change? What is it looking like now with all that's transpired?
Well, I think it has never been any closer, but since the regime has never been any weaker, the resistance has never been any stronger. But it is not just simply because of what happened in the last 2 weeks, as dramatic as they were. This is a culmination of years and years of developments about how people have stood up against the regime, how protests and uprisings repeated themselves despite heavy-handed crackdown and hundreds and thousands killed and arrested. Actually, a lot of factors are coming at the same time. There's a confluence of several factors at the same time, all against the regime and to the detriment of the supreme leader. So yes, we are getting to a very critical phase, and I think Iran at the cusp of a major change.
Yes, definitely. And what I wanted to ask is, how is the resistance doing right now? Is it growing?
Definitely, yes. And as I said, this is the work that has been done diligently. As you know, there is a network of resistance units which are affiliated to the main Iranian resistance movement called as the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, also known as MEK. They have been active in all 31 provinces throughout Iran, in all major cities and towns, basically endeavoring with great risk to break this spell of repression, to encourage people to stand up to the regime and prepare the grounds for another uprising. They burned the big pictures of Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. They burned the statue of, Khamenei and other symbols of the regime. They also put the big pictures of the resistance leader, Madam Mariam Rajavi, in highways and places like this. All in all, to encourage people to stand up and to challenge the regime. And sometimes they even go after the repressive centers of, which is called Basij, which is the paramilitary apparatus that the regime uses to suppress people at local levels. So they are basically, these resistance units are going out of their way, men and women, to prepare the grounds for another uprising.
And within the last couple of weeks, with the events, has the resistance grown? Are more joining the ranks?
Well, it has been a steady process. I mean, as I said, it's not limited to the last 2 weeks, but you see, Iranians in general and the youth in particular are coming more and more to understanding that there's no future with this regime. They see all this misery, devastation, poverty, because of this regime. Especially young people, as educated as they are, as talented as they are, they see no future. But at the same time, again, they, very, as I said, like the resistance, know that the change will not come with a foreign war. That the ultimate solution, while it's a regime change, but it's by the people and the resistance, and only this is their responsibility. This is their mission. And I think that's a very important fact to keep in mind, that the change will come, the change should come, but it will all come from inside Iran by the Iranian people and the organized resistance, because you do need an organized resistance to lead the way, to give direction, and to basically charter the path for change and what comes after, because it's also very important to be open-eyed about what comes next, the day after, because obviously nobody wants chaos. Nobody, wants to see basically situation getting out of control and turmoil. And I think that's one achievement that the resistance has had, and that is it has established a very, very concrete plan for a transitional period with very concrete steps, with a very concrete timetable.
The resistance right now is very organized. It seems as if both the United States, by bombing the nuclear facilities, and also Israel by going after Evin Prison and some of the other targets, is making it easier for the resistance. Are those moves on the part of Israel, or which happened, of course, with Israel in retaliation to Iran's planned attack, but are those events making it easier for the resistance, those installations being bombed?
Well, for instance, the Evin prison you just mentioned for Iranians is epitome of repression. And one has to keep in mind that this prison in particular was built by the previous dictator, the Shah, and his notorious secret police, Sawak. And the irony of history is that many, many dissidents were killed at that time, at the time of the Shah. And when the Shah was overthrown and deposed by the Iranian people because of his corruption and because of his repressive rules, when the Khomeini regime took over, they took over the same prison, and again the dissidents were put back in the same prison. So when you are talking about Evin prison, for the last half a century, literally, this has been the epitome of repression in Iran. And, people realize that it stands for their murder and incarceration of their beloved ones. So, all in all, obviously, the regime has never been so weak. But, as I said, it is the culmination of a long process. The uprisings inside Iran, the regime's difficulties in the region, the shellacking of its proxy groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthis, and also the overthrow of Bashar Assad regime, which was the linchpin of the regime's regional strategy for the last 4 decades. So all of that has added together. And on top of this, you have a bankrupt economy, you have a very discontented population. So if I may use the metaphor, our chickens are coming home to roost for the supreme leader at the same time.
Now, you mentioned the Shah, and Reza, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Pahlavi has been also speaking, and he's meeting with investors. He's thrown out the Cyrus Accords, and he is asking also for the resistance. How is your group compared to his group? Are you in unison? So if you can just fill us in on that.
Sure. You see, the National Council of Resistance has a very clear political demarcation. It is anti-Shah, anti-Mullah. The reason being, these two currents, these two methods of governance for the last 120 years have been synonymous with repression and totalitarian way of ruling. Historically speaking, Iranians have been fighting for democracy for the last 120 years, literally since 1906. And two currents, hand in hand, have prevented democracy to prevail in Iran. One stage was the monarchy, and the mullahs and the clerics were helping them. And when the Shah was ousted, the clerics took over, and the monarchists are helping the clerics. So that's no wonder that when people demonstrate in Iran, one of the main chants are down with oppressor, being it the Shah or the supreme leader. Because, as I said, people want to get rid of dictatorship in any shape and form. They want a true democracy. Having said this, Reza Pahlavi, people know of him simply because he's a son of a deposed dictator. His only notoriety is because his father was a dictator who was booted out because of repression, because of his corruption, because of massive nepotism. The fact of the matter is, he represents nothing inside Iran. He has no political, credentials, and he has never disavowed from his father's, killings, torture. He has never distanced himself from his father's notorious secret police Savak. And actually, he takes pride of being in contact with the IRGC and the regime security people. And one has to pause. IRGC are the very same people who are killing people inside Iran. How on earth can you imagine that a democratic person can come to power by, collaborating with them? So he has no seat on the bench, if I may say so, when it comes to the future of Iran. And one has to keep in mind that when we are talking about bringing down the mullahs and establishing democratic government in Iran, we are talking about a very, very serious issue. We are talking about a historical change. And it is not just a matter of, photo opportunities, sound bites, and things of that sort. It takes a serious...
Well, actually, he just did something quite big. I mean, he spoke on CBN, which is the leading evangelical network, and he mentioned the Cyrus Accords. Well, everybody on CBN knows of Cyrus in the Bible, and Cyrus being favorable towards Israel and causing a major change in the region. So he's almost equating his leadership with, or if he's calling for him to be the next leader of Iran. So what you're saying is he may be presenting this, but that's not the case at all. That's not the real platform he's on.
Of course, and as I said, the Iranian people are not ready to change the turban and the robe with the crown and the cloak. I mean, and as I said, just a good soundbite here and good soundbite there would not basically unseat the mullahs. We are talking about a very, very serious undertaking. It takes a huge network inside Iran. It takes a lot of sacrifice and toil. I'm talking about a movement inside Iran which has lost 120,000 good young men and women Iranians over the years. It takes, sacrifice. It takes an organization. It takes a courageous leader. Just trying to jump on the bandwagon and providing sound bites will not do it. And as I said, if you ask him about
not only sound bites, you got it with an audience that would be favorable, but based on what you're stating, is actually being misled by him because he represents something actually very different than what he's presenting.
Definitely. If you push him hard and basically say, look, what is your position on your father's, killings and torture? He simply would not give you an answer. When you talk about, when you ask him, how about the money that your father plundered? He would not give you an answer. If you ask him, about his father's secret service, notoriously known as Savak, which killed, large number of dissidents, he will not answer. If you ask him about his father establishing a one-party rule and saying that anyone who does not like it should either go to jail or should leave Iran permanently, he doesn't answer. If you ask him how on earth you want to bring about a change, which is your organization, what is your, basically people, he will give you a very, very wishy-washy answer because there is none. So, and also, if you ask him where are your supporters outside of Iran, the rallies that he puts outside of Iran gathers the most, a couple of hundred people. And, there's a big diaspora outside. I mean, just for comparison, the NCRI meetings draws upwards to 100,000 people. So, as I said, providing some good lip services and, good, a well-versed speech, scripted remarks, basically does not do it. And again, more importantly, one has to listen to the slogans from the streets of Iran. People in the streets of Iran are chanting, down with oppressor, being the Shah or the supreme leader. So people of Iran, especially the youth, are quite open-eyed about what they reject wholeheartedly. and they don't want to go back from one dictatorship to another one. Look,
I'm really glad
we're
that you're setting
Iranians.
the record straight here, because
Me
it was a
too.
very powerful speech that he gave to a huge CBN is a huge audience.
I realize that, but at the same time, look, what did Khomeini do in late 1978 and 1979? He said things that he did not believe, and we saw immediately what happened after. And actually, there are a lot of information that the Iranian regime enjoys the son of Shah's activities, because they say when the choice becomes the mullahs and going back to the monarchy, who would like to go back to the monarchy? And that's a very false narrative. And actually, that's a very, very misguided perception that the choice is either the current regime or going back to the previous dictatorship that was booted out by the Iranian people in 1979. What happened in 1979 was the Iranian people rose up because the Shah's regime was repressive, because Iranian people lacked the most basic fundamental freedom, because the country was plundered, and the Shah and his retinue embezzled billions of dollars, from which, by the way, Reza Pahlavi is still living in luxurious life. He hasn't worked a day in his whole life, and he's just doing all his luxurious life based on the money that his father.
I'm sorry, that was funny. He hasn't worked a day in his whole life.
Exactly, 46 years. So
actually, his roots. I'm here in Connecticut. His roots are in the same territory. He was Greenwich, Connecticut.
Of course. No, I know that. What I'm saying is, actually, I've seen the Iranian state press that depicting someone like him as an opposition is good for the regime, because it shows that this very much benefits the regime in reality, because people say, oh, the choice is between, as I said, between the turban and the rope and cloak and the crown, and who wants that?
Let's talk about, in just a minute, I'd like to talk about your leader, who you would have. I'm not, again, exactly sure how to pronounce her name, but I like the idea that it's a woman. So if you want to tell us a little bit about her.
Madam Rajavi is a metallurgical engineer. She went to the most prestigious technological university in Iran, equivalent of the US MIT. She joined the ranks of the resistance against the Shah, lost a sister in hands of the Shah's notorious Sawak. Another sister was tortured to death while she was 8 months pregnant under the mullahs.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, she has suffered a lot. Her brother-in-law was gunned down in broad daylight in Geneva back in 1991. He was Iran's first ambassador to the UN Human Rights Commission after the revolution, but when Khomeini started violating the Iranian people's rights, he resigned and joined the resistance. And he was gunned down in broad daylight in 1991 in Geneva, quite savagely. Madam Rajavi played an important role in organizing protests and mobilizing students during the revolution that overthrew the Shah. And immediately after, when the activities began to basically expose the true nature of Khomeini, she played a very, very crucial role. And she left Iran. She surreptitiously back in 1982. When the regime was after her, and she rose in the ranks of the resistance. And in 1993, she was elected by the resistance to be the president for the transitional period. And she has
addressed... What a story. No. I mean, what a story. This brilliant woman with this horrific past of loss. Wow. She must be
exactly. And now there have been several attempts on her life, several attempts on her life. In 1985, she was going to address a big gathering of, 15,000 Iranians in Dortmund, Germany. And the German authorities found out that there's a plot against her by Hezbollah functioning out of the Iranian embassy there. Just as recent as 2018, when the annual gathering in support of the NCRI, upward to 100,000 people gathered in north of Paris. the Iranian regime wanted to bomb that gathering targeting Madame Rajavi. Actually, the French Interior Ministry and Minister acknowledged this the other day, that she was the prime target. You see, there was a gathering of, as I said, upward to 100,000 people from all over the world in support of the resistance. There were hundreds of dignitaries, people like Rudy Giuliani, Tom Ridge, and many, Newt Gingrich, and people of that caliber were present. And the Iranian regime had a concrete plan to bomb that event. Can you imagine? To bomb it, literally. And an Iranian diplomat was based in Vienna. He was, quote unquote, the third consular in the embassy in Vienna. Went to Iran, took the bomb, put it in his own briefcase, and flew an Austrian airline commercial flight to Vienna with a lot of men and children and women in the plane. I mean, that tells you what kind of regime we are dealing with. That his diplomat puts a bomb in his briefcase and flies in a commercial flight with ordinary citizens who have no idea that they are actually traveling with a time bomb. Then this diplomat in Vienna.
Is she popular in Iran among the resistance? Is she a favored candidate?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Obviously, you will not know until the election takes place. I mean, that's obvious. But you see, the regime was going out of its way to target her, as I said, in 2018. Eventually, that diplomat was arrested just hours before the operation. And if it was not foiled, it would have been the most dramatic, the bloodiest terror operation in Europe in recent history.
Another question. You're in Paris, and French President Emmanuel Macron has come out for diplomacy. Kaja Kallas, the European Union's High Commissioner, Foreign Policy, has come out for diplomacy. So they're screaming diplomacy when it comes to Iran. What's your thoughts? You're in the European Union. You're in France. What is your thoughts when they're screaming for diplomacy? And the reality of, basically, you just shared it, that this is a regime that's very violent, that can't be trusted. I see it's obvious that they wear two masks, a mask they present at the UN, and then what they're really doing, what they're really up to, that doesn't always get widespread media attention. What's your thoughts on the attitude within the European Union for diplomacy and sitting down, or Israel sitting down with Iran? Or the United States sitting down with Iran?
You see, this sort of diplomacy that they're talking about, especially Europeans, and as I said, the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, the Biden administration, this was synonymous with appeasement. This endless negotiations, treating this regime like it's a normal, member of the international community. Calling it things that this regime does not respect, does not, abide to. So while nobody can dispute diplomacy, but what does this tantamount to in reality? In reality, this diplomacy they're talking about has given the regime at least 2 decades to advance its nuclear weapons program, gave it a free rein for all its malign activities throughout the region. It gave it a free pass in killing and torturing and mutilating, thousands upon thousands of Iranians. And they, a lot of times rolled the red carpet for the regime's representatives. To what end? And who paid the price? So I think one lesson to be learned now, today, is that enough is enough. All these endless negotiations, just, talking for the sake of talking, not holding the regime accountable for this whole host of, misdeeds they have done over the years.
But what do you think is behind Europe's ignorance? What's behind the ignorance for them to still talk about diplomacy? Is it because of how the EU was formed, that it was formed after World War II, and they took 2 enemies and were able, which was France and Germany, and united the coal and steel? Is it that mentality that now they believe that everybody can be negotiated with. Because I'm in your corner. I look at Iran and I say these are literally the villains on the world stage. They're evil, and there is no negotiating with this type of an enemy.
Sure. Actually, I don't call it ignorance. I call it misguided policy. First of all, to some extent, I can say it's driven by short-sighted economic interest. You know, a deal here, a deal there. And their companies getting contracts, and very short-sighted. So that has something to do with it. Strategically speaking, they have bought this concept that for years that there's some moderates in this regime.
Also, I heard through a friend of mine at The Hague, who is actually working at The Hague and in a think tank, and he told me that there was a group, in Spain, one of the political parties was funded by Iran. So how much of that is happening throughout the EU? How much are they funding? How many of these parties are they involved in? And how much does that play into the politicians taking their view? Which is they're wearing a mask and they're not telling who they really are because they're villains.
No, that's the point I was about to make. That's exactly the point I was about to make. That, for years they conjured up this concept that there are some moderates in this regime. And, people like Javad Zarif and, sleep talkers. And they said, we have to deal with them and we have to give them, incentives to them and give them cookies. So the moderates will ascend and one day they will...
Give them cookies. I like that. Give them cookies.
Exactly. And they will take the upper hand and they will be at the realm of things, and then Iran will come to its senses. Now, with the benefit of retrospect, with the benefit of hindsight, in retrospect, what did happen? The mullahs, as I said, took all these concessions, and the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, had the last laugh, because every money they got was spent on advancing nuclear weapons to finance groups like Hezbollah, Houthis, and IRGC, and also
October 7th attacks, which were so violent.
Also, indeed. And also as a whole host of activities, and also repressing Iranian people. So, and in order to reinforce this concept...
I'm sorry to almost forget that and to not mention the oppression. The stories that I've read that have come out of Iran are just so unbelievable of what's being done against against their own people.
Especially women. Especially young women. I think I have to emphasize this. It's especially against women is unbelievable. Mind-boggling is very, very, I would say, soft expression. And in order to reinforce this mentality, we are talking Europeans, you know what? The Iranian regime even recruited some of these quote-unquote experts and directed them from Tehran. They look like benign experts providing expert opinions on political issues and policies, but in reality they were carrying the water of Tehran in Europe, giving quote-unquote expert opinion, and all of their opinion was that give concessions to Iran, recognize Tehran's request, be considerate of Tehran's rights, and so on and so forth. Softy approach. And they kept warning.
That, I think there's also a major propaganda machine. I mean, you can hear the propaganda, the catchphrases. There's geopolitical gaslighting that Iran is notorious for, putting back on Israel what it's actually doing. It's a geopolitical gaslighting, and I see a lot of this. And then you see these spokespeople or the experts repeating the propaganda. And how much is Qatar in with Iran? I know Qatar funds a lot of the media and holds a lot of the views.
That I don't have information about. But about the Iranian regime's apparatus, you said it very correctly. You hit the nail on the head. And one thing that they always do, they keep doing, they always do, is as part and parcel of their campaign. You talked about killings and torture and executions in Iran. Part and parcel of that campaign is demonizing the democratic opposition, making them look like, villains, calling them names.
They've
to
actually been
justify
very
repressing.
effective. And I notice if I come out with certain pieces, there's literally trolls all over YouTube. And they look for certain, I believe they look for certain phrases or keywords. So they get the videos and then they all come on and they all sound the same. And I realize that there are trolls. They've even got trolls in putting out or further enforcing their propaganda.
Very much so. And actually, there's a cyber army from Tehran. They have their agents in Europe and elsewhere, and this is all controlled by Tehran. And another perspective I'd like to throw in here: their demonization was not only propaganda; it was also trying to prevent the West to see the real democratic forces. So the Iranian equation would always be binary. What do I mean by this? The narrative that they pushed, these experts, this quote unquote, people on the internet and places like this, was this. Okay, you either go to full-fledged war with Iran for regime change, or you have to make a deal with them and make concessions. And who wants to go to war with Iran? Whose benefit is it to go to war with Iran? Nobody. So they knew this is non-starter. It is not politically savvy. It is not morally correct. It is not ethical. So at the end of the day, with some ups and downs, they had to make concessions. And that was lovely narrative for the mullahs. They did not want the world to see that there is a totally disenchanted population that wants change, that there is a viable democratic resistance out there and a viable alternative. Because the minute you throw this into the equation, the whole thing changes. People will start asking, why are we talking like this to the mullahs? Why are we making concessions? Why are we freezing their assets? Why are we treating them like a normal state governance? And all sorts of questions. The reason that this vilifying campaign was so intensified was to prevent the realities on Iran to be known for huge geopolitical and strategic gains. And now it's about time that this veil be removed and see Iran for what it is. If you give this regime any legitimacy, get engaged in these talks instead of holding them accountable for all their misdeed, trust me, you are brewing the seeds of another bigger crisis. That's inevitable. And I think now we have the benefit of hindsight of what happened in the last 2 weeks.
I think that's an interesting point, but it's hard to hold them accountable the European Union and the politicians throughout the nations when Iran is funding some of the political parties that are getting them into power. So they're not going to hold them accountable. But I'd like to ask a final question because our time is running out. Are you more optimistic than ever for the new regime change or for the change, the mullahs to be outed, your people to be in, than ever before, given the circumstances of the last couple of weeks or the events?
Well, I'm much more confident and much more optimistic because of the path that we have come all this time. This is a path full of toil and sacrifice. We have come a long way against a lot of odds, but I think we are at the last phase. The mullahs have run out of their strategic resources. The veil that they put on Iran has been to some extent removed. A lot of myth that they and their advocates and proponents advocated for years is now broken. Like, the regime is very strong, it's invincible, or if you do something to the mullahs, the people will rally behind the flag. All of them have burst. None of that happened. Reality check is very strong. I think, John Adams said, no matter how you spin it, facts are stubborn things. And now facts are proving themselves. So I think now people are getting to know the reality, and the resistance is obviously gaining a lot of momentum. All we are asking is, once again, the message is very simple. There is a viable democratic alternative, which has come a long way, not on somebody else's blessing, but because of its endeavoring and sacrifices that its members and the Iranian people in general have made. Be on their side, listen to their voice, and go for the third option. Change by the Iranian people for the Iranian people. This is very much within reach. And that's my message.
That's fantastic news. And that's what I meant in the beginning about exciting times, because I can see already the writing on the wall, and a democratic Iran is definitely closer than ever before and on the horizon. Shahin, I know you're extremely busy. You're in demand by every outlet now, or many different outlets. I want to thank you today for coming on and taking the time. And definitely we'll have you again.
Oh, that's my pleasure to be in your program, and thanks for having me on again. And may I wish you good days and weeks and happy summer ahead.
And you too as well, there in Paris.
Thank you so much.
That was an incredible interview, information packed, and I was blown away by the background of Mariam Rajavi and her horrific, trauma-filled background. Who would think? Who would have imagined? And the incredible strength that this woman must have, and hopefully will be the next leader of Iran. I hope you found this very informative, just as much as I did. And definitely, if you don't subscribe to the Twist News, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more.